Perfect. All right, everyone. Welcome to our HeatSmart FLX South program tonight. My name is Erica Herman, and I am the campaign director with the HeatSmart FLX South group. Tonight's program is the 4th out of 5 of our webinar series. To the center of the earth, well, almost, a ground source heat pump case study. So I will be revealing our guest presenters in just a bit, but just some brief housekeeping. For those of you tuning in via Zoom, welcome. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, just to cut down any background sound, we will be recording this presentation and posting it. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or we will also take some brief pause moments for any questions. Thank you, Steve, again for monitoring that for us. For anyone who is visiting us via Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead and put any comments or questions in the chat, and we will get back to you tomorrow with those answers. So hang in there with us. Okay. Our HeatSmart FLX South program is one of about 20 sister, what are called clean heating and cooling campaigns, otherwise known as HeatSmarts, across most of New York State. We are a community-based entity, and we are heat pump campaigns. So we are supported by New York State's Energy and Research Development, NYSERDA, and also Cornell Corporate Extension, where this specific HeatSmart is based. We also serve the communities as well as Schuyler, also Seneca, Steuben, and Yates. And we're super excited to help empower folks to enable you to adopt heat pumps. And we're going to be talking about a very special kind in just a bit for your heating and cooling needs. Our campaigns are around and us to help folks decrease their heating and cooling costs while increasing comfort and health and safety in the home, and also a great addition of decreasing our fossil fuel usage. So without ado, let's dive more into the program. Looking at a larger picture of why we're here today, our average home energy use. So about 75% of our typical energy usage in our New York State home is for heating and cooling. Guess what the majority of that goes to? Heating. Yes, it's a bit chilly up here, so we definitely rely on that quite a bit. The average New York homeowner is paying about $2,500 in energy bills per year, and that's anything from using natural gas, propane, oil, pellets, all kind of averaged together. So by switching over to heat pumps, especially ground source, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, you could save hundreds, if not more, a year, and we'll find out how much from Paul in a little bit by adopting a heat pump. Where are we when it comes to what's going on with greenhouse gases? With our buildings, that is a good chunk of it at about 30%. So those emissions are coming from our homes, our places that we work or we shop at, or places of worship, all that kind of put together. So by investing in heat pumps, we can work together to bring those greenhouse emissions way down. Our program with HeatSmart FLX South is not only for homeowners, which we're also excited to work with, but also renters, landlords, as well as small businesses and nonprofits. So we serve a large group of folks and do one-on-one energy advising and support for as much as little as you need to get you to where you want to be. What are the different pathways? So weatherizing the space is a great place to start, and also then following by installing heat pumps. Or maybe you've done the weatherization and you're ready to jump to heat pumps. But what is this weatherization? Like, what does that actually mean? So I like to think of weatherization in the terms of what I call sweater building blocks. So let's fast forward in a couple months from now. Maybe some of you think it's already cold with like in the 60s temperature we have right now, but it's gonna get a bit colder. So picture yourself a little later in the fall. It's a nice autumn day. You put on your nice cozy warm sweater, maybe has a wacky animal pattern on it, and that's your insulation. So you take a step out your door, you walk out, it's cold, but you're feeling good in that rockin' sweater. You walk around a bend and this cold swoosh of air goes right through your sweater, and you march back to the house and you decide, maybe I should go back out, but I need to put on a windbreaker, which is your air sealing. So you pop that over your sweater, go back out, go around the bend, and you cringe waiting for that cold air to come through, but you don't actually feel it because you have not only your insulation, your sweater, but also your air sealing, your windbreaker. So just like for ourselves, having our sweater and windbreaker, we want those things for our home as well to keep us cozy inside and outside. A great thing you can do is work with one of our vetted program contractors. Helco is who we work with. They can come over to do an energy audit to find out where the air leaks are in the home. Is there a lack of insulation? Maybe it's sagged. maybe there's an addition put on, it's just dirt floor underneath. They'll help figure out what's going on with some of your concerns. They'll also do some safety checks and check out your appliance efficiency at the same time. So I am extremely excited to let you know about our wonderful presenters tonight. Paul Bursick is joining us all the way up from Schuyler in-house, and as a homeowner. He, as well as his wife Lynn and their cat and dog, live out in the country, out in the Trumansburg area in Schuyler. And Paul's going to be chatting with us tonight about his ground source heat pump system. Along with his ground source heat pump system, he also has a lovely orchard and also has some solar on the property, which is pretty great. So we're very excited to have him tonight. Our other presenter I'm very excited to chat with you about is Kevin Moravec. He is the president of VanHee Mechanical. Kevin is one of our 4 heat pump contractors that were vetted by residents within the 4 counties we serve. So we're very excited to have him here tonight. VanHee as a company has been installing their heat pumps for about 40 years or more. And they use the technology, the geology, and capability to really work with homeowners and businesses to get them really great HVAC systems. He not only does that, but he also spends some of his other time as a New York GEO board member, and he's pretty psyched about his job. He loves working with people on a daily basis and being able to learn and understand how to meet those needs of that homeowner or business owner for clean heating and cooling. So as Kevin says, and Kevin, I don't do the best voice impressions. This is not going to sound anything like you, but I don't even think about my system after it's installed was something he had quoted that he loves to hear from folks. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor space to Paul and Kevin, and I'll make sure to do some brief pauses just in case there's any questions throughout the program. So without much further ado, Kevin, why don't you chat with us to give us a bit of a primer on heat pumps?
Thanks, Erica. Paul, it's good to see you. Nice to be in a forum with you. Yeah, I mean, Erica, you did a good job of teeing things up as far as what the HeatSmart program is based on. As a contractor, while we do both air source and ground source, I would say that we primarily focus, probably 75–80% of our work is based in the ground source side of things. Along with being the president of VanHee Heating, I'm also the president of VanHee Mechanical Incorporated, water well drilling company established in 1934, which plays a big role in about 50–60% of our geosystems, including Paul's, where we install vertical closed loop systems. If you want to go to the next slide, Erica. So energy efficiency and heat pumps, what's this all about at the end of the day, besides doing the right thing for the home and the environment and saving money for homeowners? The number one thing we always hear from potential customers is, how much is it going to save me? Is it going to make my home more comfortable? Healthy homes is obviously a big piece of this, but the number one is the energy savings. Geothermal typically sees between 50 and 80% savings versus propane and fuel oil. It's at least 75% against electric resistance. Against natural gas, we'll see, depending on the home and the system, right around 25 to 35% savings. Obviously, the more effective the envelope of the home is, the greater those savings can be over a long time. Next slide. Basics of a ground source. So ground source is a very interesting technology. We get asked all the time, how does it work? How do I need another source of fuel to take the 50-degree earth energy up to 75 or 80 in my house? It sounds like a magic box. Essentially, what we do is install a solar collector in your yard. It can be horizontal, it can be vertical, and there's a lot of different configurations on both of those. We collect the solar radiation that's stored in the earth. The compressor inside your basement multiplies that and turns it into superheated gas that we can, in Paul's case, generate hot water for baseboard, radiant, air handler systems. In the example shown here, that's a forced air system. We can distribute directly through a duct system, just like any forced air system that most people are comfortable with. The efficiency of the system is because the amount of energy stored in the ground and how we are circulating fluid through that collector system, all we're doing is moving energy from one place, concentrating it and distributing it. There's no combustion, there's no waste. It just takes the energy of the compressor and the pumps to move that energy and make it more effective inside of your home. That's where you see that 4 to 5, in some cases 6x fuel efficiency over propane, fuel oil, gas, and electric resistance. Next slide. So what is it? Already talked about, vertical and horizontal. Those are the two prime systems. On the slide here, you see an example of a lucky, very nice, laid out horizontal system. This is in Irondequoit, New York. We can do ducted systems, water-based systems. We can do VRF systems, very similar to our air source systems that we talked about in other presentations. We can trench, we can bore, we can do a combination. The ground temperature is very stable here in Western New York. Vertical systems will see an average deep hole temperature of about 54 degrees. And when we're doing a horizontal system, we can see anywhere from, it's 6.5 feet depth. It ranges down to 45, 44 degrees. And then in the tail end of summer, we can actually see in the mid 70s. We do require excavation in almost every single case. Drilling is case by case basis. Horizontal wells are rare. Can happen, more of a DX type of a system. And as they talk about here, open loops are rare. It's more of a, if it's needed, that's the only other option that we have. We can do it. It's less than probably 5% of the total market in New York State. Next slide.
All right, so let's bring Paul out of the shadows. Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Oh, you might have to unmute yourself.
Excuse me, I stupidly muted. We built our house in 2003, and you see the aerial photograph here. But the house and the garage below that picture, next to Kevin, is our place. It's about 3 or 4 miles from Trumansburg, and about 2 miles from the National Forest in the Hector Backbone. We had what was at the time when we built in 2003, a very high efficient propane boiler that connected to our radiant floor system, heated our hot water, and then that was done by propane, of course, as a fuel. And the propane was also used for our kitchen stove. We also have an air source heat pump for air conditioning in the kitchen only, really, that we have appended to the side of the house. And it's somewhat effective, but when that system goes, we're going to get back to Kevin and his group and use the potential for the ground source heating as also our cooling source, because that's the most efficient way to go and what we're planning in the long run as we go forward. So next slide, if I'm still on. I learned about all this through the HeatSmart Tompkins. A neighbor of ours, in fact, had a ground source heat pump, and he showed us around after we had a presentation from the HeatSmart folks, and we were really interested in that because he is a trusted person to us. He's a good friend, and was very enthusiastic about his ground source heat pumping. He said over and over again, it's set at 72. I don't think about it all year long. It's just always 72, no matter what it is I do. We did see a ground source heat pump way back in, I think, in the year 2000 or 2001 at one of those energy open houses that were all over Tompkins County. And I was blown away by one person, the only person who had a ground source heat pump, and he was very technically oriented, apparently. He had a whole closet full of dials and needles and flip switches and all sorts of things that I thought, well, I'm not going there. That's not me. Unfortunately, when we made our choice, we're very hands-off, and we don't have to worry a thing about it. Again, set it at 72 and go. That's all we worry about. Next slide. So we did more sessions, and we continued to learn about what it is we were going to do, because our propane boiler was getting to be 16, 17 years old. And we knew that it wasn't going to last much more than 20 years old. Once we were turned on by referral to Kevin with his VanHee group, we saw that it was economically feasible to forget the next 2 or 3 years of the propane boiler and move immediately over to the ground source heating. In the meantime, we had already set up one large solar panel, 45 panels, with Renovus, a local Ithaca company. And that was providing for us much more than what we needed to run our house. But then remember, that was with the propane already in there. So we were pumping literally, and this is honest, over $3,000 a year in propane into our 500-gallon propane tank for what it is we needed. Plus, we were producing surplus electricity. So it encouraged us to look even more seriously at moving the propane tank out and going to a full electric system using the ground source heat pump. So we were able to replace the propane boiler for the radiant heating in our first floor, which we counted on really heating our second floor for the most part too, or at least keeping it at a reasonable temperature. Our hot water heater, and then we got rid of my cherished gas stove. I used to be a chef. I love gas stoves, but after a while, I finally bit the bullet and got a new electric stove, and I'm really happy with it. It's working great. And I'm also really happy that we got the guys to come and pick up our 500-gallon propane tank and carry it down the driveway to our cheers and applause. We were so happy to get rid of that. Next slide. So of course we contacted the contractor. Kevin himself came from VanHee. I don't want to make any promises. Kevin may be too busy to make himself appointments anymore, but he came by and showed us what it is that we would need. And it literally took, once we were on the schedule, less than 2 weeks to completely install. And he came, showed us what we were going to do. I think you may see in a few photos and later on in the presentation, we presented to him an extremely cramped space in our basement. And he said, my guys can do this. I think we can squeeze all of this in here. And they did, including replacing our 40-gallon hot water heater with an 80-gallon hot water heater. So there was even more room than Kevin was willing to promise up front. But it worked really well in terms of the logistics to get all of this in. And about 50 feet away from the house, they went down 500 feet, put in the loop, came back up. You see in the bottom picture, the pipes come up out of the earth. Kevin's better at describing how long this system would work that's out in the yard. I think from what I understand, this is going to be a forever system for us, and we don't have to worry about it. It's only fluid running through the pipes down into the ground to achieve that level of temperature that's down in the ground. And then it comes back into the heat pump system, both for the radiant heating, which is what we have in the house. And that is a loop that's curled through the cement floor that's in the first floor. As well as some pipes that run up into corners of our house on the second floor that would otherwise be less able to be heated by the first floor. With that trench, we covered it over, let it subside for 2 or 3 months, and then build a nice garden going all the way out to the beginning of where the hole was dug. So now we have an extra garden. It was already tilled for us. It was already worked up with Kevin's subcontractor. So that was kind of a side benefit, and that worked really well. Next. Kevin, do you want to do this?
I can go through it, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I guess
So,
I have
yeah.
a 4.7 ton system, but I have no idea.
Yeah, the ton of the system. What Paul has, what we see here, and there's a couple pieces of it, because like he says, it's crammed into a very tight space. Luckily, when we look at something like this with an existing radiant system, it's not quite plug and play, but it's very close. We're able to reuse some of Paul's piping. We did redo the pumping system. We use a method called direct to load, which takes the hottest water directly off the heat pump, goes across a thermal expansion tank, which you can see in the top left photo. There's a buffer tank that sits there. The hottest water goes off of the heat pump across the top of that tank, and when there's a zone that calls for heat, that zone gets the majority of the capacity from the heat pump first, and then what the zone can't accept, the buffer tank takes. The system is a water furnace, NEW OptiHeat. We're capable of producing up to 145 degrees. We don't like to do that if we can avoid it. We're much more comfortable in the 135 degree range, which I believe Paul's system is set at roughly 132. There's a lot of tweaking and adjustment that comes with these systems over the first year or two to try to find the exact sweet spot of where the system's optimal performance sits. We do have, as Paul mentioned earlier, a fairly straightforward add-on for cooling later. There'll be some piping magic that we'll figure out on how to get a hydronic air handler either to the second floor or someplace around the kitchen so that we can do space cooling and supplemental heating. So if Paul wants to run the air handler on the seasonal days, he can do that instead of trying to bring the slabs up to temperature in the house, which in a passive house can always be interesting because they generate a lot of heat during the day and you may not want that. His domestic hot water tank that he mentioned is an 80-gallon indirect domestic hot water system. This particular setup has an NSW 025, and that's a dedicated domestic hot water system. So it's independent of the heat pump that serves the house, and it provides 100% of Paul and Lynn's hot water needs. You can go to the next slide, Erica. And this stays with me. This is a feature that with Paul's system, hydronic systems, the NEWs, we have some functionality with. This is the Water Furnace Symphony online monitoring platform. This photo is actually taken from a separate site just to show the imagery of it. What this does is allows us to see how the heat pump is performing. If it's a forced air system, we can actually change a lot of different parameters with it to improve COP, coefficient of performance. I can change register temperatures, blower speeds, a lot of different things, and allows us to tweak these from long distances. As you can see here, you've got some of the various things that can be monitored. This system happens to be off, so it's not really showing much. but we can monitor compressor, pumping watts, auxiliary heat if it's enabled, load pumps, which is our loop circulation system, and total system energy. Go to the next slide. And that's a customer facing slide. This is also a customer facing slide. So you can pull these up from your app, from the smart thermostat that's attached to the wall, or from a computer. We also have access to this as contractors, and it gives you a rolling 12-month energy usage monitoring platform. So it's, what I like to term with it is, it's something that puts contractors' feet to the fire. You know, we make some pretty good promises about how effective ground source systems are and how much energy we can save you. And it's really a unique platform across any heat pump technology. The homeowners can actually see how much energy they're consuming directly through their heat pump. This particular case, this is about a 2,300 square foot home. It is a forced air system, the Water Furnace 7 series. And I'm not 100% sure how the homeowner heats their house at what level all the time, but 2,700 kilowatt hours, that's their total annual heating kilowatt consumption for the year. So about $320. Their cooling is about $144 for the season, so a total of about $470. They were also going through on the neighborhood of about $2,200 to $2,400 per year in propane. And again, the homeowner has access to this, contractors have access to this, and that's essentially it. You can go to the next page. This is a slide that shows the diagnostic section. This is a contractor facing section. We have access to data points over the course of a year taken every 10 seconds, and it's recorded and stored. So we can see exactly how a system is performing under peak conditions. So the coldest day of the year, hottest day of the year, could be a 4th of July, hottest day, customer has 20, well, pre-COVID, I should say, could have 20 or 30 people in their house, and they want to cool it off quickly. We can see how the system performs under those parameters. It also allows us, when something does go wrong, as rare as it is, and it's not to say that things don't go wrong, there's still mechanical pieces of equipment, we can see the moment something fails. And when we go into the history side of things, we can actually see it was X, it was Y, it was Z that caused the failure. We can send a technician out with the part and replace it. So there's no diagnostics remotely. I can do it sitting on my couch on a Saturday morning at 5 a.m. So we really like this. Next slide. I don't know if I'm going to go through this, Erica, Paul, but
Paul, do you want to tag team it with me, or I can go over it?
Yeah, we can tag team it with all three of us if we want to.
Sounds good. Paul, do you want to start us off and we'll help round out?
Well, this looks very familiar as the quote that we got, and what the total cost was to us. And the NYSERDA grant was, of course, very helpful. That goes directly to the contractor. The $11,160 was money that we had to come up with up front, but within a year we had a federal tax credit and we got almost exactly that amount back, which we immediately paid off the very short-term loan that we had set up in order to provide that for us. So we were left with $26,000. And that seems like a lot of money. It certainly is a lot of money, certainly to the average household. But I knew that I wasn't going to be spending $3,000 a year on propane. I knew that instead of spending $150 to $200 plus in monthly electrical bills helped a lot. Knowing that those monthly electrical bills would be down to, at the time, $16, it's now $17. That has changed a little bit. when I put the numbers down in a spreadsheet and figured it all out, it made sense that this $26,000 as an upfront cost is considerable, but within 10 to 12 years, it was gone. That was it. And what I was left with was $17 a month in utility costs, and the no longer having to spend $3,000 a year on propane as it goes forward.
That's
Kevin,
a
were you
huge
going to say something?
difference.
Yeah, and one thing with that also, Paul, because you mentioned early on in the presentation, kind of one of the decision factors was you had a 17-year-old boiler heading into replacement cycle. So
Yes.
we look at in the geothermal world, not necessarily, I mean, ROI is something that gets discussed, return on investment, the payback equation. And one of the key components that we look at is the incremental cost of upgrading to geothermal. So if you go in and replace a boiler today, a propane boiler, and there's a lot of different options, a lot of different methods, you're probably going to spend between $8,000 and $10,000 to upgrade that to a modern, high efficiency boiler. So when we look at taking off an average of 9 versus the cost, it definitely influences that payback number dramatically. And just for people listening, Paul's geothermal cost is not $17 a month. He does have solar that offsets all of those, the electricity. I do want to point that out. That's a big one. So, and I think that's included on the next slide. And
that's coming up.
Yeah, and when we look at, so changing costs, 2 years ago versus today, and even in Paul's example that, we got to his project relatively quickly and were able to get it installed quickly. Everything these days, I mean, there's a lot more demand. Rigs are tough to schedule, and costs have changed. The utility rebates are not as good as the NYSERDA was, as we view it. The tax credit has reduced and will continue to reduce over the next several years. But the costs have changed from 2 years ago today. We try to limit that and mitigate that as much as we can, but it's any which way you look at it, it's a great decision, as Paul mentions later on in the presentation as well.
Yeah, and just for clarification too, when Paul had his system put in, at the time, a lot of the incentives besides the federal tax credit was originally through NYSERDA. And then that switched back in, I believe it was April 2020, am I right, folks? To the utility companies. So that's why we just see a bit of a difference on how Paul had NYSERDA, and then if he was doing it these days, who would get incentives through NYSEG. So just that for some clarification. But
Yep.
Are you folks
and
okay
also,
with, yeah.
Also, Paul did take advantage of the 12-month same as cash loan that we offer for the tax credit piece, which is, we still offer that today. All contractors pretty much offer that. And there's also an option to finance this. So you can do this over a period of 20 years if you want. So it becomes a monthly payment instead of a full cash outlay, just to help with the affordability of it.
Awesome. Thank you, too. And we'll just kind of continue a little bit with the payback numbers in the next slide. So remind us how much again you're paying, Paul, per year on propane?
Yeah, and I think Kevin is exactly right. But I in terms of not factoring in the replacement of the propane boiler, because I wanted to base it solely on the ongoing costs. So it's a very conservative estimate, this 10 to 12 years. Actually, it would have been shorter than that if you work that in. And we do currently pay it's $17 and some cents a month for the privilege of staying on the grid, which of course is very important because the battery backup systems that are out there are pretty inadequate. And although NYSEG doesn't really reimburse you very much for the excess energy that you have once a year, that you've generated from your solar panels, which is in our case, they, nonetheless, you do get a little bit back, or at least break even, or maybe owe a little bit. It doesn't really matter. It's certainly not $150 to $200 a month. That works into my calculation as I went out for that period of time. But it's a system that has worked really well for us in a number of different ways, in terms of comfort, in terms of feeling confident that the system is going to last a good long while. I don't know how long heat pumps last. Nobody's out there guaranteeing how long they'll last. But I feel at this point that it's going to carry me well into the next several years without having to worry about heating or cooling our house.
Paul, we're banking on 25 to 30.
For the heat pump equipment?
Yeah.
I'll take it. Okay. The man is on record.
Yes, you are recorded in multiple places, so you're on.
Hey, I'm
record.
only 41. I'll still be around at 66, so I'm
Okay.
fine with being recorded.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I can't promise to be around, but my heirs will come after me.
Perfect. This is a generational thing all the way around, Paul.
All right.
I'm going to scoot just to the next slide. It kind of drives some other things that Paul will also chat with us about.
Yeah, so you see that it really is a tight space. It's that right leaning angle that you see going down, declining at the top of the picture, is our staircase to the bottom floor. And at the top, it's only 62 inches. At the other side, it's 30 some inches. And Kevin's crew managed to get it right in there and put that, and I can't remember what you called it now, that excess water tank to the left. Kevin, what is that?
That's the industry calls it a buffer tank. I call it a thermal storage tank, but
Okay. So the piping that comes in, as you can see there, comes in from the outside, goes directly into the heat pump. And if you have any questions about that, Kevin's the guy to answer all of that. But it was a small space. You don't need a huge basement. You don't need a large area utility room in order to get this technology put in and to be fully effective for your house.
yeah,
Next
it was an interesting project too, because I had forgotten this. Homeowners never forget this. We had a rig that failed on site. I completely forgotten that.
Oh,
Mechanical pieces of equipment, I mean, they do fail. And it is a tight space. And one of the things that maybe is a little bit hard to tell is Paul's basement is basically finished living space. I mean, it's used. So there was an additional space to be carved out. We really were forced to fit it into the shoebox that we had. And luckily we were able to do that.
It's a fancy looking shoebox, folks.
It is. Go to the next slide. Yep.
so this is a copy of my bill from this summer. I think it was the June period that ended in mid-June. And yeah, 6/14. And you see that this is a combination really, because as Kevin noted, we do have solar panels out there that are producing energy for us. And you see at this point, they're overproducing because it's the summer and we want it to overproduce. But we have had, even though we're in this area, positive energy generation, even in January and February, depending on the weather, whether we're getting the sun or not. So those solar panels work year round, but they're obviously less capable of producing the energy that we're using in the winter. But if you're looking at it as a year-long project, which we do, as NYSEG does, in assessing how much they owe back to us at the end of the year, it's really more than proving itself worthwhile. And you see the total electricity cost on our actual bill, $17 plus. And that's what we pay and have been paying for a number of months now. That's all we do.
And the funny thing about those things, that $16 is just your meter charge.
Yeah. They call it a network connection privilege fee. And we feel privileged because, you know, if we're at night, the sun is down, we need electricity, and we feed off the web or off the system. And when we are putting out energy during the day, even on a partly cloudy day, we are putting out a bunch of energy into the local electricity grid, helping them, especially during peak times, like in the summer when cooling demands are really high. We're
Yep.
pumping a lot of energy out there and not
Yep.
using it ourselves.
Got the two best batteries out there. You got the grid and you got the ground.
Yeah. So the only other point on here that we are particularly proud of as longtime environmentalists, we're boomers. You know, we grew up with Earth Day. I remember the very first Earth Day, celebrating it in college when I was in there. I'm really pleased that our household is very close to net zero. And we hope over the next couple of years, we will show on a consistent basis that we are producing more energy than we are consuming for our house. Thanks to the efficiency of our heating and cooling apparatus, as well as the power generated by the solar panels.
The neat thing that comes from this in the future, so you have an air source heat pump right now that provides you with some cooling. At some point, when we make the switch to the hydronic version of that, you'll actually see your electric bill go down even further, because we'll actually take the heat from your house, short cycle it through the ground, pull it back out, and make domestic hot water for essentially free. So when you make that switch, there's even further savings to pass on to your daughter in the future.
Thank you.
Very nice, folks. And I know, Paul, you kind of covered this already, but yeah, it's basically like, you know, we're facing it right now. We're running out of time with climate change, and you know, folks who didn't used to do cooling are doing cooling now just because it's getting so hot, and things are just kind of jumping all over the place. And Paul, I was trying to remember from our interview that we did when we came over to visit, but there was some line you said, and it was really fascinating. And
so you want me to remember it?
you had heard something on the news. I think it was it the UN?
The day that you showed up was the day that there was an international consortium of scientific investigators who released this report. It was just a few weeks ago, talking about the truth that climate change was here. It's now. It's something that we need to do something about. I can't say I feel smug because we're net zero, but I feel that we're doing our bit, and I encourage our neighbors to consider similar actions. You know, our next project is going to be replacing old cars with electric vehicles, because the solar panels are doing more than we need right now, it appears. And the next time I trade in, it's definitely going to be an electric car. So if they ever make a really good farm tractor that runs on something other than diesel, I'll be there. For right now, diesel's it, and I'm going to stick with it until they come up with a really good one.
Sounds like a good plan, Paul. And last off, I want to polish off with Paul's shared wisdom.
Paul does not have much information on a bill that's new, but I'm sure Kevin does, and people who are in the business are keeping up with this. And I found our interactions with Kevin to be extraordinarily helpful in helping us move along this path towards swallowing the big pill and understanding that this conversion really made sense economically, which is, you know, what really changed my mind, which really pushed me in that direction. The bottom line has to be there, and the bottom line is certainly there. There are a number of resources available through Erica and her group, other HeatSmart organizations, through NYSERDA, through the EPA. You get on the web and you can find lots of information that's out there. And if you have any questions, you talk to your contractor and they will provide the practical advice to go along with the theoretical stuff that's out there to help with your decision. And then I would encourage people to put their numbers on the paper. That's what you need to do. Look at it, because I know that bottom line is really important. It is a great motivator to get you to move in a direction that you need to go. And once you do, I feel pretty confident that you're going to see some very encouraging results if you're willing to look long-term, as opposed to what's it going to cost me in 2021 or 2022 when you can finally get a hold of busy contractors to put all this together for you.
Awesome. All right, Kevin, I'm going to shoot this back over to you. But first, before we do that, Steve, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do not.
Comments? All right. Kevin, I actually had a question for you. You had referred to something with temperatures earlier, like trying to keep a ground source heat pump happy at around like 130 degrees. Can you explain that a little bit more, what the temperatures mean when you're thinking of ground source heat pumps in that form?
Well, it's like anything else with our current technology, with the OptiHeat from water furnace, we can, on paper, generate up to 150 degree water. We say 145, they have numbers based on 150. I equate it to the same thing. Just because you can run your car at 100 miles an hour between stoplight and stoplight doesn't do it any good. So we try to design systems like Paul's to minimize that water temperature that satisfies the home. The technology, the pumping methodology, the efficiencies of the system, there's been a lot of research, a lot of monitoring, a lot of really smart people in the industry that have done a lot of analysis on this. We've spent a long time, I partnered with Ryan for years and years and years now, and we jumped right into this direct to load method. And what really turned us on to it was the old way of piping boilers was primary loops into secondary loops that went to distribution. And in some cases, there was even tertiary loops that came off of those. It was a hodgepodge because the boiler doesn't care. It'll run at 180, 190 degrees, and it's pretty happy. Geothermal doesn't like that. Especially with the changes in refrigerants, as we get more and more environmentally friendly with our refrigerant gases that we can use, it puts more strain on compressors. So keeping pressures inside the box low is what allows me to tell Paul that 25 years from when we installed that it's still going to be operating. And what the technology does, I mean, even today, the technology is advanced. I mean, there's different heat pumps that we have access to that we're starting R&D on right now. So it's going to be an evolving process over the next 10, 15 years as we get deeper and deeper into this.
Yeah, that research and development is really important. Awesome, Kevin. All right, well, I'll have you kind of keep going and go along with some of the benefits, just general for folks.
Yeah, I mean, why I'm pumped. I mean, I've been into this industry now for 13, 14 years. And it married really well with what my family business has done. It marries well with what I see where the industry and where the heating and cooling sector needs to go, where the environment needs to head. And we're in a very interesting time because we have a lot of policy push from up top. Programs like this and individuals like Paul are creating a substantial groundswell. So we're starting to get to the point where we're going to meet into the middle, which is everybody. And The technology is getting better and better. The contractors are becoming more and more familiar with ground source technology. And to be honest, there's really very little difference. One key difference between air source and ground source, and it's just, you got to put something in the dirt outside. One costs a little bit more, and the majority of that cost is tied up into the ground loop. And in an example like Paul's, if he had to pre-buy 25 years of propane at his rate that he was paying previously, he's spending $50,000, $60,000 on propane at current rates. That ground loop is pre-purchased all of the heating energy in that house for the next 300, 400, 500 years. As long as nobody decides they want to dig that garden up bigger and go deeper than
Backhoes there.
5 feet, that ground loop will exist as we put it in there for a long time. And even if somebody does nick it, we can go out there and fix it. It's not a big deal. It's just plastic pipe. From a health and safety standpoint with this, there's no combustion in the house anymore. There's all kinds of examples in the media. Gas pipelines are failing. They're leaking methane at production sites. It's a dangerous fuel that we have termed it a stranded asset. The technology, the gas grid is massive, but step by step, person by person, with folks like Paul and Lynn, we're making a dent in getting rid of fossil fuels. Go to the next slide. How much can you save? Obviously, this depends greatly from home to home and even geothermal system to geothermal system. At the upper echelon of savings, there are variable capacity heat pumps. So they have 12 different stages of operation, very similar to what most air source heat pumps operate with. The compressors can modulate based on the demand in the home. And what we mean by demand or load matching, the hotter it gets outside, the geothermal system just matches what the home needs to remain cool. As it gets colder, the system just ramps up just enough to keep the temperature set at 72. These rates are, I assume, based on NYSERDA through NYSEG. And this is an average cost per million BTUs. When we talked with Paul originally, and we talked with a lot of customers about this, there's a couple steps when we go into sizing, and everybody wants to know what my potential payback is once they see the numbers. And one thing that we can do is a true up of a manual J by doing a fuel analysis. So we know how many gallons a homeowner uses. We can convert that to ground source or air source and project that against your operating costs with your existing fuel. And it's pretty close to what you see on the screen here. We are probably just a little bit higher on average here in Western New York. There's a lot of great contractors here in Western New York. So especially in the Finger Lakes and in this program. So you can go to the next slide, Erica. So fuel volatility. I don't know that we really know what this is going to look like in the next 20 years as policy changes, as things like gas prices start going up, as we put more and more pressure on the heat pump movement and the electrification of our heating sector and cooling sector. But you can see relatively easily the low cost of converting away from fossil fuels. The blue line represents an air source heat pump, averaging in that 20 to 25 million BTU range, dollars per million BTUs. Obviously, when it's cold out or very hot out, air source is impacted with those temperatures. Ground source is not as impacted because we're insulated by the ground. That's our energy source. But it's pretty drastic when you look at the savings between propane, fuel oil, and I don't think they don't have resistance electric on there. Natural gas falls someplace in there right around the air source heat pump range. A little bit better in the winter, obviously worse in the summer. So go to the next slide.
All right, well, thank you so much. And before we go into our Q&A section, I just wanted to kind of polish things off by asking yourself, not can I afford this, but can I continue to afford heating the way I do? Kevin did a really great explanation of like actual like tactile money-wise finances about being able to afford it or not. And Paul emphasized really putting down the numbers to really take a solid look at to make an informed decision. But another way of looking, can I afford this, is future generations. You might have grandchildren, maybe you have a niece or nephew, maybe there's just someone that you care about who's the younger generation, and what kind of world do you want to see for them? Do you want to see the greenhouse gas emissions climbing, it getting hotter? Looking at a bunch of different ways. There's not a right or wrong answer for this. So just something to kind of think about. To kind of close our presentation, I also want to mention, okay, so we heard this great story from Paul, which we're very lucky to have him, and also Kevin, thank you so much. But what do I do next? Say I want to learn more about ground source heat pumps, or you mentioned something about air source, what do I do? Our HeatSmart FLX South program, as well as our vetted program contractors that we have on today, we are here year round to help support you. So feel free to give me a call over at the HeatSmart FLX South program so I can help get you started on navigating some options. We'll get you connected to our awesome program contractors, and they will set up a site visit and help you get the work done that you're interested in accomplishing. So what we're looking at from you today is know that we're here to help you. We're here to help you reach your goals. Know that heat pumps are, especially ground source, are a very viable means to heat and cool your home, business, or nonprofit. Know how to reach us at the FLX South program so we can help you today, or in a week, or a month, or when you're ready. And also, please support our work by engaging. Become a volunteer, tell a friend, check us out on Facebook, or just say hi and start from there. Again, as mentioned, this is the fourth webinar in our 5-part series. Our next one is going to be at lunchtime, so bring your favorite lunch on September 15th from 12 to 1. Heat your water smarter and not harder, a heat pump 101 session. We also have accessibility, so if you need to do a call-in option or need slides emailed or mailed to you ahead of time, just let us know. Again, my name is Erica Herman, and I'm the HeatSmart Campaign Director. My physical office is over in Montour Falls, over in Schuyler County, just close to Watkins Glen State Park. So feel free to come over and then check out the park. My email is the HeatSmartFLXSouth@cornell.edu. You can call the main line and press extension 38223. Do not try to go through our phone system. That is being updated. We do have a Facebook page where we post regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And again, come out and check out our next session. So again, Kevin, thank you for being here. This slide deck will be available to those folks who are tuning in now or may find this later. And then we're also having a recording. So Kevin, why don't you go ahead? I'll make it this super cheesy, and why don't you read your quote on here?
You can only read a quote if you unmute yourself.
That's also true.
So since she can't imitate my voice, I guess I'll say we are very excited to work with HeatSmart FLX South in order to expand the heat pump market. Thank you.
Well said, Kevin. All right, so we are going to open up the floor. We're going to check the chat with Steve to see if any other questions popped up. Again, thank you for those of you who are viewing through Zoom and or Facebook Live, or who are tuning in at a later point to check this out. So we are going to be hearing from our contractors. So we highlighted VanHee Mechanical, and we'll do a nice introduction of our other partners, Daily Electric, Halco, as well as Lake Country Geothermal. So I'm going to go ahead and stop share screening, but we'll keep this recorded. Paul, thank you so much for being here. We're so very, very excited to have you. But yeah, so why don't we kind of go in order? We did a nice introduction with Kevin and talked about the heat pump system you put in for Paul. Why don't we go ahead and kind of go round robin Hollywood Squares, and we'll also introduce some of our other great heat pump teammates. So Steve, would you like to go first?
Sure.
To introduce you and your company?
Yep, you have to pardon my voice. I'm fighting a cold a bit. Steve Cooper, owner of Lake Country Geothermal. We've been around since 2016. All we do is geo and hydronics for the time being. Probably do some other things going forward, but we're not looking to do everything for everybody. We want to stay specialized.
Awesome. All right, Daly, why don't you go next? Leah, Ryan. They might be driving, so we'll give them an extra second. Matt, I know you can talk for a while. Why don't you go next? Oh, there's Ryan. Hey, Ryan and Leah. Do you want to go ahead and introduce the company and a bit about yourselves? Oh, there's a volleyball game going on. I'm glad they could join. So I'll go ahead, and if they have a break, they'll jump right in. But Ryan and Leah are with Daily Electric. They are based out of Penn Yan. They have a small crew of about 20 employees. And Ryan's father, Bert, and his mother are actually in the business of doing electric, plumbing, and heating systems. And so it's actually been passed on throughout the family. So Ryan actually brought up doing more with ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps, in addition to the other offerings through the family business. And I know if you could voice his opinions right now, he also is super excited to put in geothermal systems. So if things calm down, we'll have them pop up a little later. But Matt, Hal, why don't you take it away and introduce what you do and who you're with?
Well, I certainly don't want to take time away from Ryan. We know how chatty he can be. But so my name is Matt with Halco Energy. A little bit about Halco. We've been in business since 1984. We are a whole home performance contractor, which means we do everything. Our motto is, yes, we do that. So the idea is we can come into your home and pretty much fix any problems you have. It has to do with home energy and home comfort. We can take care of it for you. Insulation, home energy assessments, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, traditional HVAC, heating, plumbing, electric, you name it. At 150 employees, we cover 26 counties throughout Central New York, the Finger Lakes and the Southern Tier. Been with the HeatSmart idea. Actually, I think we were probably doing it before HeatSmart came along. So, but we've been with HeatSmart, the several different HeatSmart campaigns throughout our service territory since the beginning, since the very first iteration of HeatSmart Tompkins 5 years ago. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, we can handle pretty much anything you got. We look at the house as a whole, so we want to make sure the home is tight, is well insulated, and is as efficient as we can make it. And then we shift into these renewable technologies and the air source, ground source, and then hopefully potentially put solar on your roof too. So, you know, top it all off, get you to a net zero sort of setting, and then hopefully, keep the ball rolling and help out as many folks as we can. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. And Paul, I know that I am looking forward to when I own a home. We're looking for a while. So what wisdom do you have for maybe like new homeowners? Like maybe it's not a new build, but they might be moving into a new home and they're trying to make up their mind, like, should I put in heat pumps? What kind of advice do you think you might give?
I think they need to stay forward looking. If they're in a home, they may think they're going to be there for a couple of 3 or 4 years and then maybe move on. Perhaps their career will dictate that, but they're probably going to be there for 10 to 20 years for most people. They stick around, and rightfully so. This is a great place to live. So it's wonderful to put that investment into your home. And then think, if you do sell afterward, to be able to show the people your utility bills, which they're going to want to see. And they're going to say, okay, what do you pay? How efficient is your home? How efficient have you made this place that you want me to buy? And I think you'll be able to show them a very good picture of what it is you've done in terms of an investment and why they should be willing to pay even more for your home than what you're asking.
And Paul, how did you decide to do either like the horizontal trench versus the vertical, which is what they had in your home, where they just had, dug about like 4.5, 6 feet down, just one single line, and then had that hole they made a well in? What made you decide to do one over the other?
The vertical well seemed to me to make a lot more sense. There was much less disruption. I mean, I have 84 acres on my farm, so it's not like I'm lacking space for horizontal, but knowing that it's going to be one hole, 500 feet deep, close to the house, and make it an efficient design seemed to me to be a lot better than looping pipes around a maze of horizontal trenches. It just seemed like a better alternative to me, and using fewer materials, getting it done a lot quicker, and being able to move forward to get the proper equipment installed in the house in August and September before the chill months come. So
That makes sense.
some of each of those things came into account for me.
Now, Kevin, there's something you mentioned when I was chatting you up to get ready for this presentation, and you mentioned there's something that sometimes happens on people's utility bills in around January, February. Could you shine a little light on that and kind of explain what people might see and like what that actually means for folks?
Yeah, one of the things that we always, I'd say probably between 15 and 20% of the time when somebody makes a transition to a heat pump, air source, ground source, doesn't matter. They very quickly forget that they had an alternative energy bill over the course of the winter. Propane delivery, fuel oil delivery, and a lot of cases homeowners have an actual read month and an estimate read month, and it goes back and forth. What we try to impress upon people is make sure that for the first year of putting in any kind of a heat pump system, do an actual read every single month, because when you replace your fuel oil or your propane in December, January, and February, if you have an actual read in December and then an actual read in February, you're actually getting 2 months of energy bills for your heating system compiled into your February bill. So it looks like a big number. It's really not. You got to divide it by 2, but we come across that here and there.
That's good to keep note of. And then someone had mentioned a manual J. Matt, can you explain what is a manual J? Is that an energy audit thing? Is that a heat pump thing? And what does that mean to like a homeowner? What does that encompass, a manual J?
So the ACA, which is the sort of industry standard, has a lot of manuals and they're all lettered. So the J actually doesn't mean anything. It's just that's what it's called.
Like a
but
code.
What a manual J is a it's a heat load calculation. It's a detailed calculation that you figure out how much heat does the house need in a specific design criteria. So whatever the temperature outside is and whatever the temperature inside is tells you how many BTUs per hour the house needs. Typically in our climate, we usually use 0. It varies, but it's usually right around 0 depending on where you are. And, and 0 degrees outside, 72 degrees inside. That's our design criteria. So how many BTUs per hour does the house need at that design? You take a lot of variables, the insulation, the air leakage. Those are the 2 biggest ones. You look at the windows, you look at the orientation, you look at the doors, you look at, you can get even further detail and look at building materials and roofing materials. There's a lot of really in-depth stuff you can do to get a really precise manual J. But it's an industry standard. It's something that you have to do. Gone are the days, at least with professional contractors, gone are the days of guessing BTU by square foot, or whatever will fit through the door, or taking out what's there and putting in
whatever will fit through the door. Oh no.
Front door, back gate. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't. What is that?
It'll fit through the front door or the back gate. It's the right size.
Oh, no.
There were a lot of crazy banana ways to size heating systems. It's just kind of the way it was, that's sort of what the industry was, but it's evolved to much more sophisticated methods to now when we size a heating system, we're confident because we're doing it right. A lot of the times we find that the house needs a smaller heating system. That's the bulk of the time. Very rarely do we find oversized or undersized heating systems. And from an efficiency standpoint, it's actually more efficient to round down. But a manual J tells you what your house needs on paper. It's a mathematical calculation based on what the home needs in the area. But that manual J varies depending on the area. You go down south, it's something very different. But it's just the calculations and the variables and stuff.
That's helpful to know.
And cooling.
And then, Paul, did you notice, like, comfort-wise, like, were there any rooms that felt cozier or more even, or what did it like feel different? Like once you actually started using your new ground source heat pump water-based system for heating, was there like just a different feel to it?
Well, we very rarely touch the thermostat. We don't mess with it. It's just there. The comfort level is there. With propane, it kind of heats things up and then it goes down below the temperature that you want it to do. Then it kicks in and heats things up again. It kind of goes up and down, more so than what the system that we have, which keeps it at whatever you have it set at. We have our house set at 72, probably 2 years ago, and we haven't touched it. It's just there, and I guess the wall thermostat has a purpose, but for us, we just go by and see that it's set at 72 and we're done. We don't have to worry about it.
That makes a lot of sense. And then Kevin, I know that you mentioned like with Paul's, it was in a bit of a tight space. Is there usually a lot of artistry that goes into designing the ground source heat pump systems that you've been putting in, whether it's like the water-based ones or maybe it's tied into like a ducted system?
I would say the artistry is more in the execution than the design. You can draw as pretty of a picture as you want and expect it to just kind of slide into that space. But at the end of the day, there's main components that need to fit in there, and how they get from A to B. We try to make it look as nice as possible, as easy to replace something as possible. Forced air systems, they're slide in, slide out in a lot of cases, depending on if we have to adjust duct systems and everything like that. But there's not a lot of, I'm probably making it sound simpler than it is. We do so many of them that it's plug and play. We do a lot of prefab work. They don't change an awful lot from setting to setting, and that's just a testament to the technology as much as anything, with how we pipe it and control it. Interesting thing when a system like Paul's is we actually monitor water temperature through the slab, and that's one of the main drivers that controls the system. We want to maintain a slab temperature as much as we maintain air temperature, because if the slab is where it's supposed to be, the thermostat that's 4.5 feet above it's going to be right where he wants it.
That makes sense. And then Matt, are there just like to be transparent, are there like additional costs that sometimes come into play with ground source heat pumps, just for people to like kind of keep in mind, besides like the general cost of the system itself?
I mean, there can be. It really depends. So, for example, if you go into an old, 100-year-old farmhouse that's super drafty and
we have a lot of those here.
Needs insulation. Yeah, that's our building stock around here. Paul's house is newer. It's an extreme outlier, but the bulk of the housing market in our area are old. So putting in one of these sophisticated, high efficient heating systems in an old leaky house isn't really effective. It's not a good idea. It's always good. It's always, no matter how you heat your house, it's always better to keep the heat in. So it's always good to make sure the house is tightened up and insulated and done well. As Kevin had mentioned with forced air systems, a lot of the times there's ductwork modifications, especially if it's old ductwork or undersized ductwork. We got to look at that. If you've got a hydronic system with baseboards instead of in-floor radiant heat, that's a different animal too, because, you know, water temperatures are different, as we discussed. If you got hydronic and you want cooling, it's not as straightforward. So a forced air system is easier typically, because you get heating and cooling right off the get. But yeah, there's always sort of extra costs, and you know, we talk to folks all the time that Google this stuff and say, oh, I found it's going to be this much. Well, if this were the case, yeah, it would probably be that much. But unfortunately, your house, you've got a 30-year-old oil furnace in a 150-year-old house with octopus ductwork, and it's all over the place.
Oh, I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
They're still out there. We still see them from time to time.
Have you seen some, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean,
3 days ago.
Yeah, so you gotta, you know, bear in mind, you know, these things, they can be involved. Sometimes it's fairly straightforward and we luck out and it's kind of a slip in, if you will. But the bulk of the time, there's some, you know, as Kevin said, there's some artistry to it, kind of putting these things together to make them work. I mean, our homes were not built for 21st century technology. So
yeah, alien technology.
I would add to that typically there's, you know, all of the additional potential options and add-ons that's all discussed up front. There's never an, oh, by the way, you know,
oops, I forgot.
Yeah,
no,
design it from the beginning, not as you go through.
That does not happen.
And to make folks feel comfortable, when we vetted all of our program contractors, such as the many lovely faces you see today, we actually looked through like proposal sample ones and made sure there are things that were like understandable for folks. So thank you. Oh, Kevin, I forgot. What is a good, if you're putting in like a geothermal system, what's a good rule of thumb for how many amps you have for like your panel box for your electric?
I mean, we prefer to see a 200 amp service in a home. You can get away with 150 on some heat pumps. But it really just depends on what the capacity of the system versus the home is. 200 amp you're pretty safe.
It's a good standard. And then Paul, what do your pets seem to think about this new ground source system? I know when we went to visit, you had a cute little kitty and dog running up to greet us. What do they think about this?
Since you've been here, we've got 2 new puppies.
Really?
And everybody seems to be really happy, particularly because we have the radiant floor heating in our entryway, which is the new kennel for our new puppies, and allow them to soil that up all over the place. And as things get cooler, they're going to be able to stay nice and warm on the floor. So yeah, I think everybody's comfortable with the general steady and reliable heat and cooling that we get.
No cold pause.
Nope.
Well, everyone, I want to say thank you so much for coming to tonight's program. And I think just to polish it off, everyone's been a good sport. I always come up with some random question to ask all the contractors at the very end. So thank you for being a really good sports about this. I think my question tonight is going to be, what are you looking forward to for the upcoming fall season? So Paul, you can either go first or you can pick someone to go first since you're the guest.
I'm done. I'm net zero. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm not looking forward to any further contractor calls or talks or design discussions or anything else. I encourage the rest of you to jump over the fence and be on my side with me as soon as you possibly can.
Sounds like a good place to play. You got puppies over there.
Yeah.
Kevin, you go next.
Well, I mean, if you're going to ask silly questions, I'll give silly answers. I'm hoping on the personal side, I'd enjoy to see a nice 8-0 fall season for the Bills. Get that going right. And then for business and heat pump side, I mean, really just keep it going as it is. I mean, we're all very busy. The more people we get a chance to talk to and educate, even if it's not something that you personally do, but it gets passed on to a friend, a family, a neighbor, a colleague, a random acquaintance. That's what's going to continue to get people over to Paul's side of the fence.
All right, Kevin, you get to tag someone.
I'm going to make Hal talk.
All right, so we've got we're purchasing a house that's new to us, but it's an old historic house, and this is going to be a very exciting geothermal conversion, because what's the system that's in there is the folks that are in the heating business know what I'm talking about, but it's a 2-pipe steam system filled with cast iron radiators through this.
Oh my gosh.
And but fortunately it is a 2-pipe steam, so we're gonna convert that to hot water, hydronic, and make it all geothermal. So it's gonna be an exciting project.
I can just hear those radiators starting to leak as you pressurize more water. Pretty sure you've mentioned doing that more than once. So
Yeah. Yep.
You better watch it, how you're going to be a case study.
I hope so.
there you go.
All right, Matt, your turn.
Personally, I'm looking forward to cooling down, because I'm sick of sweating my butt off when I go into houses and looking like a sweaty mess. But yeah, when the weather changes, that's when the people start turning their heat on and heating calls work, and people start to think about heat again. They're pretty much hopefully done with cooling, but that's when it becomes front of mind awareness, and we can start talking about these things a little bit more when folks call us up and say, hey, my furnace stopped working. Hey, have you ever thought about geothermal or air source heat pumps? And so I like it when it gets cooler out. I don't like the cold. I don't like the snow. I don't care about the cold. I don't like the snow.
That's fair. I'm sure we all had those days. Okay, I'm gonna finish off by saying that I'm looking forward to going to more open houses to check out for new home opportunities. And I'm very excited that I'm equipped with the heating knowledge to be like, oh, that's a cast iron system. I don't know if I want to touch that. So excited to go to more open houses, and then enjoyed some hearty malt cider as well. So Paul, any last words before we sign off for tonight?
No.
I think we did a lot from Paul. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Everyone's been a great sport. Thank you for coming tonight, and we will see you all soon on the 15th. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.